People often believe life's biggest mistakes happen in moments of anger or recklessness. But sometimes the most life-changing decisions are born from something much quieter. Loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being physically alone, but the kind that settles deep inside your heart while you're surrounded by people. The kind that grows little by little, until one day you hardly recognize yourself anymore. It starts quietly. A missed conversation. An unanswered feeling. A moment when you realize nobody has asked how you're doing in a very long time. I never imagined my life would become the story I'm about to tell. If someone had asked me years ago whether I would ever find myself standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything, I would have laughed and said no. I was a wife, a mother, someone who believed in loyalty, commitment, and doing the right thing even when it was difficult. At least that's who I thought I was. But life has a way of testing people in places they never expect. Looking back now, I don't think everything fell apart in a single day. The truth is that it happened slowly. So slowly that I didn't even notice it at first. It happened through silence. The kind of silence that grows between two people who once couldn't wait to talk to each other. The kind of silence that fills a home until every room feels colder than it should. For years I told myself everything was fine. After all, my husband and I had built a good life. We had been married for 12 years. We had 2 wonderful children, a comfortable house, stable jobs. The kind of life many people spend years trying to create. From the outside, we looked successful. But appearances can be deceiving. Because behind closed doors, something was disappearing. Connection. My husband, David, wasn't a bad man. That's what made everything harder. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't the kind of husband people tell horror stories about. He simply stopped being present. Every morning he rushed out the door before the day had fully begun. Every evening he returned home exhausted, carrying the stress of work like an invisible weight on his shoulders. Conversations became shorter. Date nights disappeared. Small gestures faded away. Months passed. Then years. At some point, I stopped telling him how lonely I felt. Not because the feelings disappeared. Because repeating them felt pointless. I would start speaking and realize his attention was somewhere else. His phone. His emails. Tomorrow's meetings. Anything except the woman sitting right beside him. Little by little, I began disappearing too. Not physically. Emotionally. I stopped buying clothes that made me feel confident. Stopped spending extra time on my appearance. Stopped expecting compliments. Stopped hoping for meaningful conversations. Eventually, I convinced myself that this was simply what marriage became after enough years passed. Routine. Responsibility. Survival. Nothing more. Some evenings I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror longer than necessary. Not because I was admiring myself. Because I was trying to remember who I used to be. The woman staring back at me looked familiar, but distant. Like someone I had known years ago. Someone whose dreams had slowly been buried beneath grocery lists, laundry piles, school schedules, and endless responsibilities. Then something happened. Or rather, someone arrived. His name was Mark. David's younger cousin. He had recently lost his job and needed a temporary place to stay while getting back on his feet. I wasn't asked whether I was comfortable with the arrangement. One evening during dinner, David casually mentioned that Mark would be moving into the guest room for a few weeks. That was it. Decision made. Conversation over. I remember forcing a smile and nodding. At the time, it seemed like a small thing. A temporary inconvenience. Nothing more. I had no idea that his arrival would eventually force me to confront feelings I had spent years trying to ignore. The first thing I noticed about Mark wasn't his appearance. It was his attention. He paid attention. When someone spoke, he listened. When someone asked a question, he answered thoughtfully. When I served dinner, he thanked me. When I shared an opinion, he actually responded. Those things sound small. Maybe even insignificant. But when you've spent years feeling invisible, being noticed feels different. It feels important. Dangerously important. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That I was simply enjoying having another person in the house. Someone who brought energy into rooms that had become quiet. Someone who laughed. Someone who noticed things. But deep down, Another part of me was waking up. A part one thought had disappeared forever. And that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. Because for the first time in years, I felt seen. And sometimes the things we need most are also the things that can change our lives in ways we never expected. The strange thing about loneliness is that you don't always recognize it while you're living through it. At first, it feels normal. You tell yourself you're just busy, that everyone goes through phases, that marriage changes after enough years pass. You make excuses because facing the truth feels harder than avoiding it. For years, that's exactly what I did. I convinced myself that my sadness was temporary, that once the kids got older, things would improve, that once work became less stressful for David, we'd find our way back to each other. But hope can become a habit. And habits can keep you stuck far longer than you realize. Mark had only been living with us for a short time, but his presence changed the atmosphere of the house in ways I couldn't explain. The house felt less empty. There was conversation again. Laughter. Movement. Life. He wasn't loud or attention-seeking. In fact, he was surprisingly thoughtful. He helped clean without being asked. He carried groceries inside. He offered to wash dishes after dinner. Small things. Simple things. The kind of things that shouldn't matter as much as they did. Yet somehow they did. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room while the television played quietly in the background. The kids were still at school. David was at work. Mark walked through carrying a box he'd been organizing in the garage. He stopped and looked at me. "You do a lot around here," he said. I laughed. "That's called being a parent." "No," he replied. "I mean really a lot." I didn't know what to say. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. But after he walked away, I found myself thinking about it for the rest of the afternoon. Not because the words were extraordinary, because someone had noticed. Someone had actually seen the effort, the invisible work, the endless tasks that nobody talks about, the things that keep a family running while receiving very little recognition. That realization stayed with me longer than it should have. And that was when I started becoming nervous. Not because of anything Mark was doing, because of what I was feeling. I began looking forward to simple conversations, looking forward to hearing his voice in the kitchen, looking forward to moments that should have been completely ordinary. Every time I caught myself doing it, I felt guilty. I would immediately remind myself who I was. A wife. A mother. A grown woman who knew better. Yet those reminders seemed less effective each day. One evening after dinner, the kids were upstairs finishing homework. David sat at the dining table answering emails. His attention locked onto a glowing screen. As usual, Mark and I cleaned the kitchen together. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Eventually he looked over and smiled. "You know," he said, "this family is lucky to have you." The plate I was drying nearly slipped from my hands. Such a simple sentence. Yet hearing it felt strangely emotional. I quickly looked away, embarrassed by how much those words affected me. "Thanks," I managed to say. Nothing more. But later that night, lying awake beside my husband, I replayed the conversation over and over again. Not because I wanted to, because I couldn't stop. That scared me, more than I wanted to admit. The following weeks passed quickly. Life continued as normal on the surface. School drop-offs, work schedules, dinner preparations, household responsibilities. Everything looked exactly the same. But inside me, something had shifted. I began paying more attention to myself. Not for anyone else. At least that's what I told myself. I started wearing clothes that had been sitting untouched in my closet, taking extra time